welcome back to My Kitten Reads. I'm Eleanor and this is my May reading wrap up. I think May for me, I finished 10 books, but it can be sort of divided mostly into stuff I had to read for class, and the majority of the month was Austen Variations because I was stressed about class. So class is over for the year. But essentially, yeah, May I was reading for class or reading Austen Variations, particularly because I decided to trial Kindle Unlimited, which encouraged me to sort of, gave me the freedom to kind of pick up Austen Variations that I've avoided previously because I wasn't sure if I was going to like the tropes that they seem to be about. Some of them I liked, some of them there were some I didn't finish. I haven't even noted them down. And some of them were just like, but I finished them anyway. But yeah, so because of with Kindle Unlimited, I can read as many as I like, but if I don't finish them, it's not going to actually cost me more than the subscription. So yeah, that was interesting, making use of that for the first time. But yes, what did I read? Well, the one book that doesn't fit into either of those two categories was the first one I finished in May, and that was an audiobook entitled The Battered Body Beneath the Flagstones and Other Victorian Scandals by Michelle Morgan. So this was a history book, which is essentially lots of little stories about scandals in the Victorian era, mostly England and America. I don't remember heaps of them. It was kind of little vignettes, some longer than others. Sort of interesting in that, I like Victorian society stuff. But honestly, it was mostly murders, which is not always my favourite. So it was all right. It was a decent read, decent listen. It was audiobook, but probably not one I'm going to go back to. And I'm not sure if I'll pick up one by that author again either. I don't know. It depends what else she's done, I guess. I haven't looked. Okay, so the second thing I finished was for uni, and that was No Friend But the Mountain, Writings from Manus Prison by Behrouz Boochani. So this is a fictionalized semi-memoir. It's technically a novel, but it's based on his experience as a refugee in detention on Manus Island as part of Australia's offshore detention policy. It's fairly brutal. It's uncomfortable. I expected it to be uncomfortable and brutal. It's important. It's actually not that, the prose is not that hard, and the prose is interspersed with poetry, which makes it something of an easier read, like a lighter read. Well, not lighter, but a faster read. Just not really for me. Like I said, important, very important piece of literature, but uncomfortable and heavy and brutal, and I just didn't click with the characters, the narrator. It just wasn't a perspective. It was a perspective I probably needed to see, but it wasn't really something I connected with. So very male. But yeah, definitely worth a read if that's the kind of thing that you're into. Behrouz Boochani is Kurdish, so Middle Eastern extraction. So I'm counting this as a non-white author. So yay. Then here we started. This is where I started just devouring Austen Variations. So, Mistaken Premise by Cherith Boardman, who is a new author to me. And this was a Nota Bennett story. I was in a bit of a mood for Nota Bennett stories. And in this one, Lizzie is the secret daughter of a Scottish peer with an inheritance who's been hidden for her own safety in Meryton. Then Just Deserts by Grunyard, which was Lizzie being meeting her Indian descended neighbour who had been through a great deal of abuse before she met her husband, meeting the neighbour and her husband and learning from them, because the Bennet parents don't really care about Lizzie at all, and so she can disappear off, on her walks, but actually she's going to spend time with her neighbours, learns a lot, ends up inheriting a lot, and it's very much also about the abuse of women and Lizzie and her neighbours' attempts to help abused women in Regency England. So that was interesting. Then Of Adoption and Acceptance by J. George. In this one, Mrs. Bennet just completely and utterly rejects baby Lizzie when she's born for not being a boy, and Mr. Bennet can't convince her and is actually worried for Lizzie's safety, so therefore takes her to one of his university friends who's very well off and without children, and they adopt her. So that gives her a different start to life. Then Pride Under Good Regulation by Ezel Tease. In this one, the Bennet family has a history of being eccentric and well-read and marrying eccentric women from the continent, and having a massive collection of literature and art. And so therefore all the Bennets are actually very intelligent, very well-read. And therefore when the assembly happens at the start of the story, Mrs. Bennet takes Mr. Darcy to task. So their interactions are very, very different. And then Such Novel Notions, also by Ezel Tease. Lizzie ends up helping Anne de Bourgh, who wants to get a message to her uncle, because if she doesn't by a certain date, then she will not be able to take on her inheritance, and she needs to get out from her mother's. This particular Anne de Bourgh also has learnt most of her social interactions and how to deal with people from novels, which sort of worries Leslie a bit. But she's a friend to Anne anyway. Then I did a reread of a book that I do actually like, but it was for uni, and that is Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is the first book in the Sixth World series, which currently only has 2 books, because as I learnt doing my research for my essay, there was some controversy in America over these books and their representation of the Navajo. Rebecca is not Navajo, but she is of Indigenous and African American heritage, and her husband is Navajo, but certain parts of the Navajo were not entirely happy with the way she represented the Navajo here, and Rebecca has since said in interviews that she understands that future stories will need more nuance. There needs to be more nuance in some of the representations that she's used. So but I reread it for my essay because we were allowed to use a text from outside of Australia from the 21st century if it fit with our topic, and my topic was on Indigenous struggles and colonialism, so I used Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse, reread that, enjoyed it. It now has sticky notes in it from marking things that I might want to talk about. So that is also a person of colour, so that is my 2 people of colour for the month. So I'm still doing amazing with all that. Not so much with the queer stuff. There is a queer character in Trail of Lightning. I'm not sure if I will include it because it's a secondary character and it's only a brief mention, but we'll see how I think. And then I read a couple more Austen novelizations, a couple of Shana Grandisons who I had previously avoided reading because I wasn't sure I was going to love the tropes. So Banished by Shana Grandison, which involves a bad Jane who is indulged and taught wrong by Mrs. Bennet and therefore betrays Lizzie, and because Mr. Bennet decides to support his wife, Lizzie is banished from Longbourn when she refuses to marry Mr. Collins. So she flees to Gardeners in order to not have to marry Mr. Collins because she's not too far from her birthday. And things go from there. And then A Curate's Daughter by Shanna Grandison, which Lizzie is not a Bennet. She is in fact the daughter of a curate who has changed his name and is actually the second son of an earl, and the grandson of an earl on his mother's side. And a whole bunch of tragedies happen all on the one day, including her house burning down. Mr. Bennet happens to be passing the parsonage, has Lizzie thrust into his arms, and then her father runs in to try and save his wife, and they both die. So, but there's no family left because the Earl, whose his maternal grandfather, died in a bandit attack on the same day. And so, with the approval of the parson who was in charge of the curate, Mr. Bennet essentially takes in Lizzie as his ward and takes her back to Hertfordshire. But there are still members of her family that wish they knew what happened to her. And of course they come and meet her when she's finally turned 18 with a series of circumstances. So that was kind of fun. And those were the 10 things that I read in May. There will be more variety in June, I promise. Mainly because I actually have downloaded the Hugo packet. So I'm going to read and try and vote in the Hugos this year. And I have a month and a half essentially to do as much reading for that as possible, which I've already started. I've read a novelette and I'm about 40% of the way through another novelette. I'm hoping I can get my exercise going again because, again, every time I try and start my exercise, my back flares up again. It's a whole thing, which means then I can't exercise, and I do a lot of reading on the treadmill when I'm exercising. So hopefully I can start that back up again very, very carefully. Good things, I think, hopefully coming for this next month of reading. I'm still ahead of my overall count. I'm probably behind in terms of queer representations. Or I do currently have an audiobook going that will help with that. I'm hoping my Hugo Award reading will help with that, and also I think I'm ticking along quite well with the people of color reading, like author of color reading, and that I think is going to very definitely pick up with my Hugo reading as well, judging from the list. So that was my May reading wrap up. I'm rambling a bit now. Always happy to chat in the comments about books. Please feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you again really soon. Bye.